Shri Dogra, my distinguished co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It makes me particularly happy to be with all of you in Chandigarh. I have some fantastic memories of this place. 4 short postings, but nevertheless, it always feels nice to be here. Every time I come to Chandigarh, I find the ambience, the attitude of people on the up. The most important part is that Chandigarh is another think tank, and a think tank which is not, embellished by all sorts of things in Delhi. You have your independent view, and I hope you keep the strength up. I can hardly have any pretensions of being counted amongst, the great scholars, military scholars, or strategic analysts. But I do hope that I pass muster today, and that is what my intent is, not to pass off as a scholar, but that I have put on my thinking cap, and not what I have to say, I say with a sense of responsibility and not anger. Satyame Jayate. What an inspiringly powerful national motto. Truth, the essential quality required for the building, the consolidation of a nation which is not too old. Don't talk in terms of 5,000 years of history. You have to talk of yourself as a country, one country, independent country. Our history is very short. But more than anything else, the necessity of truth in formulating your strategic and military plans. If there is defeat, especially a rout, following the national motto and pursuing truth even when it hurts, not just the heart, but the egos and reputations. Yet alas, we have been following Satyame Jayate only in the breach. An ongoing transgression since independence, for which we have paid and are continuing to pay very, very dearly. Truth, the cornerstone of the enormous moral strength wielded by a frailly built father of the nation, who amongst many things was known for his patriotism, humility, following one's conscience without fear or favor. It would be my endeavor today to try and follow that legacy and not transgress it, certainly not knowingly. It's not false modesty that made me say I'm not a scholar, because I do want to admit that my passing out from NDA was more an error than a success story of mine. I probably hold the record for the most number of retests. Retests meant that if you didn't pass at the end of the term, you came back and repeated. Now when I used to come back for my term break, the father would say, okay buddy, that's your chair, I'm tying you down to it. Mother protested, my grandfather protested. Hey, like, come on, leave. He pays for his follies, he better correct him. I went as a battalion commander 20 years later. And what happened? The number of calls I used to get from military personnel, some of them who were the alumni of this elite institution, asking me that, to get their award, out of trouble. In the old days, father said, get on with it. Your problem, not mine. We have changed because we don't face the truth. There have been a number of studies to understand and rectify the mistakes that led to our young nation's biggest disaster in the bleakest of bleak November 5 decades ago. My thesis this morning will show that the most telling cause of our national theme, our national shame, was blatant falsehood and inability to read the writings on the wall, which have been well illustrated by General Malik here, as well as Bharat. That we have taken Many steps to rectify failings of 1962, but are continuing to fail to create national, organizational, individual integrity beyond doubt. I believe it is the essential characteristics of a nation of substance. Having repeatedly admitted I am not a scholar of military history, leave alone military history, leave alone history, I don't intend to go back to the histories of where we came from, what are strategic values. I think two previous speakers have covered that most competently. But I do want to highlight that despite the intriguing reluctance of successive governments to publish the Henderson-Brooks Bharat report, there is enough authentic information on the subject, and I assume that the present, those of you present over here, at least many of you, have had access to Neville Maxwell's paper on Henderson-Brooks report, an introduction. The Henderson-Brooks report is not available, but his thesis, no, he is not an Indian, he is an outsider. I don't know how he got access to that, but it's a very authentic report. Also, the erudite Arun Shourie, everybody knows about him, and his masterful expose in a book called Are We Deceiving Ourselves Again? If not, I highly recommend the reading of both. So what caused 62? And how the person perhaps, as it was pointed out earlier, was so highly responsible for irresponsibly acting the way that he or they did at that time. It is now more or less universally accepted that Pandit Nehru surrendered vital national security interests to his ambition of being a world leader. This despite the fact that except for its sheer numbers of humanity, India possessed no significant assets by which national power is assessed in strategic terms. Nehru doggedly kept justifying China's aggression. He kept justifying it into Tibet in the name, in the face of apprehensions and advice expressed by his president, his home minister, and Mr. Dogra over here read that letter. And you see the impact of that letter. Why did he sit on it? Chief ministers of UP, Bengal, members of parliament, and many others. The Prime Minister, also carrying all the burden of perhaps the most busy, most specialized, most important ministry of the time, the Ministry of External Affairs, belittle officials. The Prime Minister telling young officers who made bold to give factual reports of the realities on ground. There were people who said, hey, listen, this is not reality. Reality is this. The Chinese are here. Watch out what they are doing. How can one follow the truth when one refuses to see the truth? Has this changed substantially over the last 5 decades? In my opinion, certainly not. How can we claim that we have the moral courage to face the truth when officially we still do not open our eyes to the truth of 50 years ago? Glossing over realities has become our national trait. What is the purpose of bringing this up in today's discussion? It is to highlight the disdain with which the Indian politician treats the very agency that is the military, that has to clean up after the former has messed up. That this attitude was established ab initio at the beginning of our independence, and that mechanisms have been set up to curb the role of the military, not only in national security policy formulations, but its very functioning. By tight controlling the point of inhibiting the power of the services over their finance, placement of senior ranks, even defining the need of weapons and support systems. Can we face the truth that the Indian soldier in 62 did not try even the basic clothing, leave alone weapons to take on an adversary far more powerful on the lofty heights of the Himalayas? Maxwell, the person I just talked about, in his speeches of 2001, has underlined the fact that a series of studies from 1960s to 1990s, not in India, outside, revealed to every serious inquirer the full story of how the Indian army was ordered to challenge the Chinese military to a conflict that it could only lose. You cannot start a war when you know there is no winning solution. When there is a military reverse, a major one at that, the military generals, admirals, air marshals, naturally, and it must always be so, come under the scanner immediately. But what about the other personae dramatis? Is no culpability to be attached to their feelings? In a democracy, the political head, even without inquiry, must step down on moral responsibility. As I understand, Nehru took that step in 62, but was, I think, rightly persuaded to stay in chair. Spontaneous resignations on moral grounds are anything but the norm in today's Indian politicians' ethics. The now infamous, at least in popular opinion, V.K. Krishna Menon had to be hounded out of office. The Prime Minister didn't want to throw him out. Yet his persona of memorabilia, his remembrance, now adorns a pedestal in the very shadows of Sena Bhavan. I have searched tourist guidebooks of Delhi and other metropolises unsuccessfully to find something in the individual memory of military personnel who contributed to our victories in 48, 65 and 71. Could somebody here help me? General Sinha, you know him, he is, I think, a great strategist, a great thinker, governor in a number of places. In the latest issue of November, Defence Watch has, in his most inimitable style, matter of fact and lucidly recounted, and I quote, how the army had started hurtling down towards the abyss from 1959 or even earlier because of the machinations of politicians. Unquote. He outlined the favoritism shown by Krishna Menon towards Lieutenant General Paul and Air Vice Marshal Harjinder Singh, as also the PM towards Paul. He refers to the first 3 days of 62 war, starting from October 20th, the lull of 3 weeks, to the total disaster of the last 3 days. General Sinha betrays the abandonment of strong defences at Sela without putting up a fight, and the Chinese pursuing the routed division down to the foothills near Tezpur. He laments the nation's loss of faith in the invincibility of the Himalayas, the infallibility of a foreign policy, and most shattering of all, the myth that the Indian army cannot be beaten. Did any military commander, staff officer stand up and offer his head in penance? No. The General BM calls and Brigadier D.X. Palits write books to cover up their falsehood and scheming. To err is human, but to lie, it is the devil's work. So what is the purpose of reopening these grievous wounds of 5 decades ago? To flog ourselves in penance, in the mold of the practice amongst many communities, for the martyrdom of those herever or wrong? No, not so. Though it won't be a bad idea to ask ourselves, do we need to have that pain as a homage to hapless soldiers who lost their lives in 1962? People gave orders from air-conditioned offices in Delhi, from their beds, giving orders which were fundamentally impossible to follow. Neville Maxwell in his treatise of 2001 pinpoints the Indian government's reason for keeping the Henderson books Bharat report top secret and giving only the vaguest and largely misleading indication of its content. To quote him, at that time, the government's effort ultimately successful. It was successful, the government's effort, to convince the political public that the Chinese with a sudden unprovoked aggression had caught India unawares in a sort of Himalayan Pearl Harbor. You know Pearl Harbor? When Japan attacked Hawaii, and certainly the Americans were taken totally by surprise. And the report's full and detailed analysis, if public, that means the Henderson Books report, it's very cool, it's very analytical, would have shown the self, and these are his words, self-explanatory mendacity. I couldn't understand what he meant by that. I look up the dictionary. And all that it means is self-exonerating falsehood. That means to cover myself, I am taking up the lies. We have to ponder on this. It has taken us 50 years to acknowledge the sacrifice, even though it came not, of those pitiable soldiers who laid down their lives because of someone else's Himalayan folly. Value of an Indian life, unless it is a politician, which is of course invaluable, since 1962, has diminished even more than that of the rupee. The Indian soldier is not a mercenary. He is not even a conscript. He volunteers to become a warrior and he fights for himself. Let us not take that away from him. And the way we neglect him, it points towards that. Both his deed and his advice. But what I have not answered the question that I asked myself. Have we learned the consequences of lying and deceiving? For the last 13 years and more, and I speak from my personal experience, I am speaking now from my personal experience. It is me you have to question, no books, nothing else. Sporadically, some of my contemporaries during the Kargil War of summer of 1999, senior army veterans, at least one if not few from Chandigarh, a few self-appointed strategic analysts have accused me of having dragged my feet in giving armed helicopter support to the army when it was demanded. Let me on this public forum say it is a Karnad, it is not so, and question me today. Although the army had bypassed the AOC and the WSC, who was the proper authority to be addressed for the purpose, I was happy that they came directly to headquarters because I thought this is a good opportunity for the Air Force now to get into the RAC. But I asked for a detailed briefing on the operational situation, and Ab initio stated unequivocally, without any doubt, that political clearance is a mandatory requirement. When the question of informing the government came up, the then VCOS, standing in for his chief, who was out of the country, backed off, saying that in that case he would do it on his own. When he approached me again, at seeing his hesitation to approach the government, I offered to do the needful. But the offer was turned down. At the third instance of the Vice Chief coming again, I asked the Chief of the Naval Staff, who was officiating as the Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff, in absence of the Army Chief who was the Chairman, to call a COSC meeting. At the meeting, the VCOS again backed off at the prospect of having to inform the government. Army headquarters soon after requested a CCS meeting without informing in advance that it had changed its stance. At the CCS meeting, the Minister for External Affairs, who was leading the government interrogation, at the meeting, although the RM was present there, asked the VCOS whether the air support was essential. The VCOS responded it was not, but that it would help in accelerating conduct of operations. As the Army said it was not essential, and also could not establish at this stage the nature of the intrusion or the identity of the intrusion, and most importantly, did not table a clear plan of action, the minister ruled on behalf of the government that the army continue on its own. What is more intriguing is the non-committal on this issue of the Kargil report. You remember the Kargil committee report? And in paragraph 13.26 of the report it comments, quote, the air chief further maintained that if air power were to be used, the country should be prepared for a Pakistani response. Therefore, the relevant aircraft and units were activated, unquote. But in one paragraph earlier, in 13.25 and the subsequent to 13.27 and 13.28, they have been removed. They have been removed by government security deletion, as stated in the report made public. If this is not giving truth the bypass, what is? If the air chief had been dragging his feet and giving air support, it was in the circumstances an act of non-performance, if not a grievous fault. And he should have been brought to book for it. But if the army was essentially wanting to keep the government ignorant, it was a misdemeanor of the same proportion requiring the same treatment. In the aftermath of the Kargil, more than 13 years later, we are writing articles, we are writing all sorts of things to cover up what happened and justify, I did this because of this. Am I standing here on this forum, at this pedestal, and doing the same thing? This cannot be left to conjecture. This cannot be said if what I say, you say, who says. There has to be an inquiry and find out. If I'm at fault, I want to be hung. I have talked about a lot about the accountability of non-military, non-political persons who were in this. Because of paucity of time, I don't have it. I've gone over it. I have numbers of paragraphs on that. And I would say that in particularly the chief of the IB in 1962. And what I said is that, it is the intelligence on which strategic and military plans are made. Now, if that input is incorrect, then your entire planning is haywire. B. and Malik had such a sway over Nehru, and he totally discredited a person of the stature of Thimaiyya. That, hey, listen, watch out, army, there's a coup, you have to keep this bikers under control. Nothing from the truth. Far from the truth. The army, the military, they have been, as patriotic as everybody else, if not more. And to say this, it is not acceptable. Similarly over here, when in the Kargil effort, the basic thing that you talked about, there were two decisions in which I have been defaulted. One, that I did not exhibit the kind of alacrity that was expected to give that support. The second part was that I didn't give armed helicopters as required. Now, my essential stand at this time was that, tell us what the task is, how to do it, what to do it, what tactics, air tactics to use for this. Leave it to the experts. I hope I'm not just standing there and doing nothing. As I young, immediately after the 1962 war, in 1963, in the summer of 1963, I went as a forward air controller to 70th Brigade in the Chimatang area. And I went along, with the army patrols or assessment teams to where you're supposed to say, okay, vehicle and defense, how can air attack, forward air controller, his job is to bring, air power and identify, because it's extraordinarily difficult to say where to attack. You can't see those targets, and you give him, references on the ground. I did 7 days of trek march at one time, trying to find out, what can be done, how a car park can be used. I was AOC J&K later on, with Northern Command. I have flown extensively in that area by fighter aircraft, as transport aircraft, helicopters, every type, as a pilot, seeing from the front what is happening, what needs to be done. I was a senior air staff officer at Western Air Command. I was the air officer commanding in chief Western Air Command. I have this idea. Give credence to me. Okay, I may be wrong. I'm not infallible. But we have to talk. And the biggest thing was this, that, the helicopters, was I wrong in saying that, hey, listen, the helicopters are extraordinarily vulnerable. Don't use them. Now, in fact, what happened, I used the helicopters against my better judgment. I did it, to make sure that, there is a certain amount of harmony, certain means hell of a lot harmony. And I have to say that two chiefs, Army and myself, we were extraordinarily close. We were extraordinarily close. We held hands literally to go and, later on, to address the army troops together. I addressed army troops, at Dras and Kargil. The army chief addressed people at Srinagar, because we wanted to show that we are all together. But if my judgment was wrong, and in fact we lost 2 fighters first, but I told the Prime Minister in the CCS meeting that I know the cause of this loss. I'm not worried. I know what corrective actions I have to take. What I'm worried about is the helicopter. These are prophetic words. Next day we lost the helicopter. I wish those words, I'm not proud here to say those words came true. I'm ashamed of myself. Because I knew the vulnerability. And this is the issue on which we have not talked about in after Kargil. Was my objection valid? They didn't need to be held up. And now we are talking, and today we are talking about where should the helicopters go? Army or this, no, we don't get them what they want, I want to have it. Now you have to assess the circumstances in which it happened, the way I have given this. Default me on that. The basic thing, what has gone wrong, this inter-service rivalry is not a prerogative of the Indian environment. It is a prerogative. It happens in Great Britain, it happens in the United States, it happens in every country. And the basic thing that we have to lay down is what are your roles, what are your capabilities, what are the expertises that you want to build. Yes, every service can have this, every can have that. And you have to make sure that is it, and you stick to those rules. This is the essence of all my pieces that I've talked about. There are a whole lot of other things I've talked, but essentially after that, the last thing I want to talk about, one of the things that, in fact, there was a special committee by Arun Singh, fabulous man, who was, earlier Minister of State, and he did a study about this reorganization of the, higher military organization. Now, I have no hesitation in saying that I was certainly a chief, formally stated that the Chief of Defence Staff, I don't think is a good idea, and I have some very good reasons for it. What way it is, that's it. That's my point of view. And I have given some reasons for it. So before you stone me, before you throw tomatoes at me, just hear me out. My plea for, not having the Chief of the Defence Staff is, systems do not deliver. Systems, organizations do not deliver, people do. It is you and I. It is Nehru's. It is Vallabhbhai Patel. It is Gandhi. It is not the organization. There is no organization, but it was the effort of that. No, I have still time. I am the moderator, General. I am the moderator. I am looking at the clock. I have still 3 minutes to go.
We are not beginning for that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have still 3 more minutes. 3 minutes. Okay, my 3 systems that I have talked about. Let us not aim the West. Our situation is different to others. 2, third, do not believe that organizations existing under the countries do not have difficulties in reconciliation, as we experience from time to time. It is not at all bad to have professional differences. If there were no differences of perceptions, there would be no need for separate services. Differences must not be settled by an overlording arbiter, Chief of Defence Staff. They must be settled by discussion and demonstrated validity of a point of view. There will be issues on which settlements may not be possible at the Chiefs of Staff Committee. Arbitration then must be at the political level. The RM, the PM, may not understand military issues as professionals, but make no mistake, they can discern validity of arguments. If they don't, woe be this nation. The last point on this is, at the Cabinet Committee on Security, the PM has his principal cabinet colleagues, NSA, PMO, his principal advisors by his side. Additional advisors if necessary. A single military advisor can never jointly put up military issues as strongly as three chiefs together. The American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff sometimes finds the going tough single-handedly at presidential meetings. If the cabinet is stonewalling his advice, we will have even greater difficulty before the Prime Minister, if the cabinet starts stonewalling, the Chief of Defence Staff will have even greater difficulty. Before Prime Minister Vajpayee gave the go-ahead to the Army's demand for air support for the Kargil war, I had to voice my support as strongly as the Army Chief. Organizations are reorganized for creating efficiencies in manning levels, cutting down costs et al. But I said earlier, not for dysfunction. Sort out the dysfunction, then do whatever is the thing that you want to do. I have spent my time, and I thank you all for your patience here. If you have questions, ask me, as you would the other. Thank you very much.